Let's see.
Got it.
With us today is Whitney Johnson. She's a good friend of mine. She's a good friend of this podcast. She's been on here a couple of times before. I'm so excited to have her back. She's the CEO of human capital consultancy Disruption Advisor. She has been writing about the S-curve for many years. She's an expert on smart growth leadership, growing your people to grow your company. The book that we're here to talk about is her latest book, Smart Growth: How to Grow Your People to Grow Your Company. There's many more things I could say about her. She's ranked in the Thinkers 50, a top 50 management thinker in the world. Most importantly, she's a friend of mine. Whitney, welcome to the Bregman Leadership Podcast.
Friend of Peter, FOP. Thanks for having me, Peter. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm so delighted to be talking to you. And in fact, if we didn't have a time, we were just talking before this podcast, if we didn't have a time limit, I'm sure we would just still be chatting and talking. All right, but I want to talk about this book. And so you've written this new book, Smart Growth. You've written a bunch of books, and they all focus on the S-curve in one form or other, which I love, because it's actually what you talk about in the book, which is, you get to mastering something and then you start to morph it into something else, and you're still leveraging the skill and the concepts that you have and bringing it to the next level. One of the things that you say in the book in the beginning is that we are pre-programmed to progress, that we're driven to grow. And I wonder sometimes, and I'm speaking of myself here, if that drive can be too much, if we push ourselves too hard to constantly grow, if we lose our ability to relax and be comfortable with what is. I'm sort of thinking about this drive to grow. The shadow side of it could be a sort of consistent dissatisfaction with where we are. And I would love to, you focus so much on growth. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. All right. So before we do that, can we both agree that we are pre-programmed to grow? Do you agree with that premise?
I don't, that's actually an interesting question. I immediately thought of what my reaction would be to it. Do I agree that with the premise that we are pre-programmed to grow? I feel pre-programmed to grow. Like I've probably evolutionarily, physically, we're certainly pre-programmed to grow. Biologically, we're pre-programmed to grow. We're certainly pre-programmed to procreate and develop our families and our species. And so I will agree to that. Thank you for asking that question. It took me a second.
Okay, so then we can both agree that growth is our default setting. So then what you're really asking me is, can this sometimes get off track? Or the way I think about it is, can these cells that are trying to grow become cancerous at some level? So that's one question.
Yeah, the image that comes to my mind right now is somebody just sent me a picture somehow from the archives of the tallest man ever, who was like, I don't know, 9 feet or 10 feet. And he had he had something called gigantism, which is a thing where like your growth is unlimited and eventually it kills you, right?
Yeah.
You die young because you can't sustain that kind of a growth, but physically you haven't limited it. So I guess I'm asking about that.
Yeah. So I think there are two answers to your question. I think the first is the natural cycle of growth. So if you're a skier, right? You ski down the mountain and then you rest, you get on the chairlift, you go back up. So there's this natural cycle to that. So I think there is that element of we do need to grow and then rest. We need to be awake, then we need to sleep, we need summer, then we need winter. So I think there's that natural cycle of growth. And I'm not sure that you're talking about that. I think you're saying, too much growth all the time. And so what I would say is that if our growth is left unchecked, and you're talking about shadow values, for example, that emerge to protect us, and we're only about our growth, for example, then they do become cancerous. And this idea of gigantism, there's not something that's putting that in check. And so if the growth that we're looking at is only about me, or it's only about you, then what's happening is the ecosystem in which we're working, in your case, it's your family, your workplace, et cetera, and you're take, you're not giving anything back to the ecosystem, then that becomes cancerous. And so that is the wrong kind of growth. That is not the kind of growth that we are talking about in this book. We are talking about the kind of growth that is you do take nutrients from the ecosystem, but you also give back to the ecosystem. And I mean, even if you want to think about this at a more metaphysical level, at some point, your body is going to die, and it will go into the ground, and it will become nutrients for whatever will come next. And so your answer is yes, there can be too much growth, but the way I think about it from a practical perspective is all of us are in an ecosystem, and is the growth that's happening growth that actually feeds the ecosystem, makes it possible for those around us to grow, or is it it's a vicious cycle and we're only pulling from the ecosystem? So that's how we think about it in the context of this conversation.
Great. And I think both your points are really excellent. Like, it's the idea of inhaling and exhaling feels very important around this also, and then not making it all about you. Take us through the S curve. This is the model that everything is sort of built on. So take us through the launch point, the sweet spot, and the mastery, sort of quickly, but to give people who don't know the S curve.
So the background of this is that the S curve is something that was popularized by Everett Rogers. He's a social scientist back 60, 70 years ago. And he was looking at it to figure out how quickly social change happens. In his particular instance, he was looking at corn and how there was this corn that could improve the yield, and people weren't adopting it. He's trying to figure out why aren't they adopting it? And he finally discovered, as he analyzed that social change that was taking place, is that change happens along an S. And so that was very interesting. It's the diffusion curve. We used it at our Disruptive Innovation Fund that I co-founded with Clay Christensen to help us figure out how quickly an innovation would be adopted. But for whatever reason, my brain goes to how can we take management theories, whether it's disruptive innovation, whether it's the diffusion curve, how does it apply to the individual? Because if we understand how it applies to the individual, then we can operationalize it. And so as we were investing, I thought, this also applies to the individual. This S curve that's looking at how groups change can help us understand how individuals change. So for everybody who's listening, what I want you to do right now is we're going to draw, we're going to draw it, and you're going to say, that doesn't look like an S, it looks like a roller coaster, but just stay with me. So I want you to take your finger or a piece of paper and go from the left to the right. So basically a horizontal line. And what that is the launch point of an S curve. And every time you start something new, you start a new job, you start a new role, you want to learn how to ski, whatever it might be, you are at the launch point of that S. And growth at that point is absolutely happening. But because your brain, and we can get more into this in a minute, your brain hasn't figured out how all these pieces fit together, it feels very slow. It feels like a slog. So that's the launch point. But then as you put in the effort, you accelerate into competence and confidence. And now I want you to take your finger and you're going to go from left to right, but you're going to do this swoop, almost like the Nike swoosh up. And that's the steep, sleek back of the curve. And what's happening there is this is the sweet spot, because now your growth is not only happening, it feels fast, it is fast. And this is where, and unlike at the launch point, it took a lot of time to feel like anything was happening. Now in a little time, a lot happens. So you've got the launch point slow, you've got the sweet spot fast. And now your finger is at the top. What I want you to do is draw one more line from left to right. It's a horizontal line, and this is mastery. And what's happening here is you are very good at what you're doing, but because you're no longer learning, you're no longer enjoying the feel-good effects that come with learning, your growth actually slows. So this S curve, what it does, it gives you this model, this simple visual model to think about what growth looks like, no matter what it is you're doing. And if you want to think about it even more simply, more simply. And this is something that Michael Bungay Stanier, our mutual friend, shared with me. He said, Whitney, so what you're really saying is slow, fast, slow is how you grow. So that's the model.
It's a very Michael Bungay Stanier thing to say.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
I'm curious because as you talk about this, I keep thinking about my kids, and I'm just curious if you've done work in education or you've done work with kids. I feel like it would be really, really useful for kids who are literally spending their days learning. Like we don't, for most of us, we learn, but we're not in that environment where 8 hours a day, they're learning and they're struggling and they're probably going through 100 S curves in a year
Mhm.
to understand the dynamic of what's happening, and they understand when it's frustrating and slow, something is still happening.
Yep.
I'm curious if you've worked with kids around this.
So, Peter, that's a great question. I would love to work with kids around this. To date, the people reaching out to us, we've done actually a lot of work in higher education, especially, well, not even especially. So, higher education at my alma mater, BYU. We've also done it with Western Governors University, who are adults returning to get their education. And when people can take this S curve, I'm going to draw it this way so you can see it a little from the backwards. What happens is that it basically traces that emotional arc of growth. And so that experience that you're having of, oh, this is really discouraging and I feel impatient, and oh, this is exhilarating, this is so fun, and oh, I'm really good at this, but I can't stay in college another day. I need to graduate. I need to get out into the workforce. Or I can't stay in fifth grade another day. I need to graduate. I need to get on to sixth grade. So yes, that could be very fun to work with schools.
So I think the way we should start is to book a conversation between you and my 14-year-old son, and just to explain to him, like, every time you hit a new section in math, you're back down in that place is going to really feel sloggy until you feel like, I got this and now I'm bored. Like, that's going to happen every single time, and don't get frustrated by it. It's just a natural process of learning. I remember the old model that I still teach and still talk about going from unconscious incompetence, I don't know what I don't
That's
know,
right.
to
That's right.
conscious incompetence, which is sort of that painful place where now I know what I
Mhm.
don't know, and I realize I'm having an impact that, is not what I intend, to conscious competence, which is a lot of energy and effort
That's
to
a
get it
sweet
right,
spot.
but I
That's a
could do
sweet
it.
spot.
That's the sweet
Mhm.
spot. That's growing
Yeah.
up. And
Yeah,
then unconscious competence, which is mastery.
exactly. Do you think your son would do that?
Yeah. Uh,
We should
yeah. Yeah.
we should do it. That would be so interesting. And
I
would
would
he
love that.
actually let us record it?
Yeah, let's do. I will talk to him
We can
today.
do an experiment.
Yeah,
We
I
can do
will
an
talk to him today. I
experiment.
would love that, to do an experiment.
Yeah, and then if he wants to air it, we can, and if he
Right,
doesn't, that's okay, but we'll
right.
still do it. I think that would be
I think that would
so
be really
interesting.
fun. I think that would be really fun.
Oh,
And if we did it with my daughter, who's 16, who's here
yeah.
now, if we did it with both of them together, she would be more. She would, I think, appreciate it. Like, she would engage with you more about it than he would.
Yeah.
But so it might make sense to do. Anyway, we'll figure it out. But
Right.
I would
Okay,
love
let
that,
me
and
let
we
me
can
give you
record
one
it.
more thing to think about as before we hop off this. So here's what's going on with the neuroscience. Your brain is running a predictive model. Our brains are processors, but they're also predictors.
Right.
So basically what's happening is at the launch point, your brain has this hypothesis about what is it going to take for me to be successful in algebra or calculus, for example. And at the launch point, a lot of your predictions are going to be inaccurate. And because they're inaccurate, your dopamine drops. And no one wants their dopamine to drop because that's the chemical messenger of delight. But you're going to keep making these predictions. And those predictions are going to be increasingly accurate. And so you're going to get lots and lots of dopamine. And that's why you start to get exhilarated, because all of a sudden now all these neuronal connections are happening, the synapses are happening. And so predictions are working, dopamine, lots of upside, emotional upside surprises. And then in mastery, what's happening is you figured out the model. Done. Good. You're getting a little bit of dopamine, but not a lot. So that's why it's hard to start something new. Why once you do start, you get lots of momentum. And once you're in master, you're like, oh yeah, I don't, I need a challenge. And so you need to jump to a new curve.
So I'm curious about the science, and I don't know that that this research has been done, or that you know about it, but I'm curious when you learn about it, because this is what I'm realizing I'm thinking with my son, or with anybody who's listening to this podcast. When you learn about the S curve, when you understand the dynamic, whether that struggle now ends up giving you a dopamine hit because you're in a process where you're launching and you're getting up to the S curve, and it's frustrating, but in a way that might actually exhilarate you instead of frustrate you, because you're in a particular kind of process. Do you have a sense as to whether that?
So okay, everything that you're saying just really resonates. So I think you're right. So I was thinking about this in the context of, so if you're at the launch point, and I think this runs in a parallel track. So if you're at the launch point and that you're going to make a lot of inaccurate predictions. So one of the things I've thought about is, you go back to Atomic Habits, right? James Clear's ridiculously small goals. So if you make those ridiculously small goals, then what have you done? They're so small, you can do them. So now your predictions are going to become accurate. So even at the launch point, you're going to get dopamine. And I think that syncs with what you just said. And my experiences that is true, because last year we were going on vacation, and I don't do vacation very well because I'm not working, and I really, work is super comfortable for me. And so I should be working. But when I had the S curve in my brain and I was feeling uncomfortable trying to unplug, I was like, oh no, you're good. You're on the launch point. You're supposed to be uncomfortable. Good job, Whitney.
That's interesting.
So yeah, I think it does make a difference.
So you talk about, in fact, you organize the book in these sort of 6 stages that move us through, or that identify points in the S curve. Growth, explorer, collector, accelerator, metamorph, anchor, mountaineer.
Yeah.
Oh, no, sorry, growth is not one. These are stages of growth. So it's explorer, collector, accelerator, metamorph, anchor, and mountaineer. Can you talk us through it pretty quickly?
At a high level?
At a high level, because I want to, or even maybe we combine a couple of things I want to do. Maybe talk us through it quickly, but use an example that, that makes it real for us, of like someone who's moving through these stages, so that it's, so that it becomes clear.
Yeah. Okay. So, so for example, so I decided about a year and a half ago, I wanted to start running, or maybe 2 years ago now, right? I wanted to start running. So actually, I wanted to be physically healthy. So I was thinking to myself, do I want to jump to the running S curve, or do I want to jump to the UFC fighter S curve? Okay, it's kind of a joke.
UFC fighter.
Exactly. So at the launch point, though, you're basically exploring lots of different options and deciding, do I want to do this curve or that curve? Do I want to run? Do I want a UFC fighter? Do I want to climb Mount Everest? And you're going through really quickly, making a decision about, do I want to explore this S curve or not? Once you make a decision, I want to explore this. In this case, I said, you know what? I think I want to run. Then you move into the collector phase, and you're collecting data of like, does it make sense for me to run, and what does this look like, et cetera. So what I did is I said, all right, I'm not going to run for 30 minutes a day. I'm not going to run for 15 minutes a day, because that was not going to happen. I'm going to run for 5 minutes a day for a week, and I'm going to increase it by 10 seconds a day. And so what that allowed me to do is it allowed me to collect data. Am I enjoying this? Can I commit to this? Do I feel good? Can I accomplish this? Does this work for me? And once I collected that data, I was like, okay, I want to stay on this S curve. Exploration is over. I've collected enough data to suggest that, in fact, I can be successful on this S curve. And so once that starts to happen, then you start to hit that knee of the curve, and you're able to start to move into the sweet spot of the curve, which is that accelerator. So that thing at this point is I am running, but it's not yet who I am. It's just sort of out there, this thing that I want to do. But when you get into the accelerator phase, and you're like, okay.
So you went to explore, collector, accelerator. What I'm curious about is, when you're running for that 5 minutes, and 5 minutes and 10 seconds, do you stop? Or if you feel good, do you keep going?
No, I stop.
You stop no matter what.
Yeah, because I want the dopamine hit of like, I did it.
Right.
Like, I want, because what you want is, you want your brain to be like, I said I was going to do it. I did it. Yeah. Dopamine. Because if you keep going, it's like at the beginning of a day where you have a list of things to do, and you start out and you're like, okay, I want to get these 5 things done. Have you ever done this? You're like, okay, I'm pacing so well. I've gotten those 5 things done. Now let me add 10 more things to my list. And so you've gone from feeling very effective to all of a sudden very ineffective, because you added a whole bunch of things to your list.
That's really helpful. That's really helpful. It's interesting because what I would do is, run for the 5 minutes, and go, oh, this feels good. And then go, to 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And then maybe I get achy the next day or whatever. So it's like, set a goal and do not exceed it. That's very unusual to sort of
hit it.
Set a goal and do not exceed it. You can always let your success in that goal change what your goal is for the next day, but don't exceed your expectation of yourself.
Yeah, because what's happening is there's this identity shift taking place, right? At the launch point, you're running. You're not yet a runner per se.
Right.
And so there's this identity thing that's happening. And if you go too far, the piece of you says, I'm not a runner, starts to hit back.
Right.
So part of what you're doing is you're tricking yourself.
Right.
And you're going so gradually. You're like, well, I ran yesterday for 5 minutes and 10 seconds. I can do 5 minutes and 20 seconds today. And your identity doesn't put up a fight
Right.
because
Right.
it's just so
Right.
small.
Right. 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 Ridiculously small habits.
Yeah. So
Right.
now you're in the sweet spot. You're
That's great.
accelerating.
So
Growth
accelerating.
is and feels fast. And so it's not yet who you are. And so back to that, conscious incompetence, you're still being very deliberate. There's this place of optimized attention of like, yep, I'm running every day. I'm gaining speed. I'm increasing duration. So that's accelerator phase. And then you move into metamorph, which is the top part of that sweet spot. And this is the place where you're metamorphosing and it's going from what you do to who you are.
Right.
And then you get to mastery. And what happens in mastery is you anchor. So now once you're in mastery, you're like, I am a runner. And so one of the things that I did is I had this goal of I wanted to run a 5K. Now I didn't go out and run a 5K, but I wanted to be able to get on the treadmill and run a 5K, which I was able to do. And so now after it took me a year and a half to get there because I went so slowly, took a lot of time to build those neural pathways. But now I think of myself as I am a runner. So I anchored that behavior. I celebrated and said, I did this. Now the question becomes is once you get to that top, if you want to keep growing, you can't stay there forever because your plateau will become a precipice. So you have to figure out a way to keep climbing. Now, in my case, I could have said, well, I want to run a 10K, but that's not a mountain I want to climb. So
Right.
I said to myself, all right, well, I want to get so that I just run now. I run a mile 3 or 4 days a week. I run 2 miles at least 1 day a week. And I'm there because then what I want to do is I've switched from running to being this goal that I had to just something that's sort of baseline for me, general health, so that I can move on to other goals. Like I probably need to take up yoga and start stretching. So that's what it looks like. So I wasn't a runner. It's this thing I did. Now I consider myself a runner. I jumped to a new S curve in this case because I didn't want to run a marathon. I just wanted basic good health. And then I'll jump to another curve to continue to be healthy.
Is the anchor always an identity piece? Like now I am?
Yeah.
Right. So now I like it sets it. And then what you're saying in terms of mountaineer or like that next step, it may be to continue to set a new goal in, I want to run a marathon or 10K. Or you may say, all right, I'm going to go off and learn something else. Like I've done this and I don't
Right.
need to
Exactly.
continue to expand this. I've gotten what I want out of this. How do you know? How do
You
you
know,
know if you've like gotten what you need out of it or if there's more to get out of it if you go the next level?
you know,
You
you
know,
just know, I think,
right? And you just sort of say, I'm not interested in this or I am, because I think if you're going to the next level, if you start to go to 10K, there's a way in which you are back at the explorer stage.
Yes, you are.
And
That's right.
that could be kind of demotivating, right? That could be
It
like,
can. It can. Right. Because you're resetting.
You're resetting, and that demotivation might kind of like, I think of people who do a lot of things and they give up a lot of things and they jump from one thing to the next to the next to the next.
Mhm.
And I think, that could be fine. Or it could stunt their growth in a certain sense. Like they love the dopamine hit of continuing. They hate the flat part. And serial business starters, who
Yeah.
and I just wonder, like when you say, I wonder whether there's like some advice you can give people about gritting through that next stage after they've gotten the dopamine hit of the.
You actually raise a really good point. So I have had people ask me, do people sometimes jump to new S curves too often? Is that part of where you're going? So
Yeah.
George Leonard called it, the dabbler, sort of the eternal kid, never wants to grow up.
Right.
And so I do think that that is a question that we need to ask ourselves. Sometimes you see this happen in companies where people will start to move into the sweet spot, especially in hot talent markets. And so they start to get picked off, like, come work for us. We'll pay you more money. We'll give you a promotion. But from a domain expertise perspective, and even from a leadership perspective, their growth starts to get stunted because they move into the sweet spot and they jump, and they move into the sweet spot and they jump, and they never complete that growth cycle.
Right.
So I do think that is a question. Now, to be fair, some people really like to start companies, and that that is what they are a master
Right.
at starting companies.
Right.
And that's okay too.
Right.
So it's just,
For sure.
I think
That's
it's,
their
I
sweet
think it's a
spot.
question of, once you've made a decision that this is in sync with your identity and who you aspire to be, are you jumping to a new curve because in fact, that is the way that you're going to continue to grow? Or are you jumping to a new curve because you gave up? And I
Right.
think that's the thing. That's part of developing and maturing as a human being, of knowing the difference.
And maybe that difference is, are you truly at the anchor stage? Like, have you
Mhm.
truly achieved the thing that you wanted to achieve? And
Mhm.
now you're at a new point, which says, do I want to achieve to the next level or something else? But if you stop midway through, if you stop in the collection stage, or if you stop in the metamorph stage, then maybe you're, and that's, maybe once or twice is fine. But if that's
Yeah.
sort of a trend, then maybe you're giving
Right.
it too soon.
Right. Now, I would say it's completely fine to stop in the collection stage, because that's the stage where you're making the decision. Am I committing to this curve or not? You're gathering the data. Do I really want to do this? Can I get the resources I need to do this? Metamorph, when you're almost there and you just sort of parachute out, you don't want to do that, because that your sense of self and your ability to complete, if you've gone that far, you're getting your focus is getting pulled. You want to complete the growth cycle, because
Right.
for a person to be a truly peak performer, and I know I'm kind of turning this on its head, it is a person who can successfully navigate all aspects of the growth cycle, the launch point, the sweet spot, and mastery.
Right. Um, I'm curious, because I have focused so much on emotional courage. One of the questions that comes to me is that one of the biggest challenges of the explorer stage is the risk that it takes to move into something new. And if it's big, it's not just a personal risk, but it could really feel like a cataclysmic risk. I'm thinking about, you have this great story of Mike Rowe and the risk he took in airing a television spot that everyone else would avoid.
Yeah.
Like a suicidal move or a great growth move. Like, it's kind of hard to tell. And there's this moment in the explorer stage that you say, is this worth the risk? Now, that's not necessarily true with 5 minutes of running, because that's a sort of safe exploration. But if you're going to put something out in the world and you don't know how it's going to happen, what's going to happen with it, et cetera, it could be the start of something, it could be the end of something.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to people around that?
Well, I mean, I think if you go back to the Mike Rowe story, I think you could argue that in many respects, so he was at the top of the curve, and that he'd been doing this evening magazine show for, I think several years. He got a call from his mother and said, hey, basically a call to adventure, right? When are you going to produce something that your grandfather is going to be proud of? And so on the one hand, it was a big risk, but on the other hand, I think for him, he would almost argue he had no choice.
That's interesting. And do you find that that's true for a lot of people in the explorer stage, that or when they take big risks, the answer is, I have no choice?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of two things happens. Sometimes you get pushed, and fortunately we do get pushed. I think that's one of the beauties actually of COVID, is that we were all on an S curve pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, and it pushed us off to a new S curve, the post-pandemic, curve. And while it's been very challenging and very difficult, it's created this sense of movement. And so people now have to decide what they want to do, but there's a sense of, okay, well, I can do this. People talk about the great resignation. I think it's the great aspiration, because people are moving and they have this sense that they can move, and the sense of self-efficacy has increased.
Right. That's great. In a sentence or two, the difference between a virtuous growth cycle and a vicious one.
Yeah. Okay. So that comes back to what we talked about at the very beginning. Of a vicious growth cycle is one where you or I are in an ecosystem and we're just taking. Now, as a child, that's going to tend to be true. But if we get to an adult and then we're still just taking, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? Can you help me with the other thing? And we're not helping other people. That is a vicious growth cycle. The virtuous is that people are giving to you and you are receiving nutrients from your ecosystem, but ultimately you're giving more than you're getting. You're getting, so that everyone in the ecosystem is growing.
Got it. Great. Okay, and with a few minutes left, I'm going to give you a tall order, which is, I want you to take me through, coach me a little bit through the S curve. And what I was thinking about as I read the book is, I'm a a pretty accomplished nonfiction writer, right? I've written 5
Mhm.
books, they've done well. Um, I've contributed to 16 others. Like I'm definitely at the, you know, mastery
Mhm.
stage at least. I didn't start there. I worked very hard. It took many, many, many years, over a decade, but I'm very comfortable with that. I have been reading these, and as a kid, I used to read these Hasidic tales, these tales of like a spiritual master walking from village to village, sort of half simpleton, half brilliant, genius, wise man, uh, and you know, kind of fun and interesting stories that also teach something. And I've really been wanting to write in that
Mhm.
style, in a much more of a fiction style. And I am definitely back in the explorer stage and feeling like I've tried for a bunch of years and I'm just not good at it. I'm just not, I don't know how to do it. I don't know what to do. So I thought, well, let me just give you that challenge and
Yeah.
help me. Like, how do I work through, how do I, and you talk about this in the book, like leveraging, you know,
Mhm.
a cousin to what you've already, a mountain you've already climbed.
Mhm.
And this is definitely a cousin, but it also feels incredibly daunting to me.
Right. Okay. Okay. So what I would say for you on the explore, I love this question, by the way. So explore key questions are, I'm going to ask you these really fast. And we're going to rapid fire. Is number one, do you believe that you can be a fiction writer?
um I like, it's very easy for me to say yes, but I think there's a part of me that's like, I just might be a bad writer. Like I might not be a good fiction writer. So that's my, like, I conceptually, I know you could do anything that, like, I could
Mhm.
believe anything that I
Yeah.
work at, I could become good at. But there is a part in my mind that just goes, I'm just not, like, I read all these great, you know, the Ira Glass thing, which is,
Right.
you know, you read all these great people, and will I ever be a great fiction writer? I don't know.
Yeah. So you want to believe it, but you don't quite believe it.
Yeah, I think I'm
Yeah.
somewhere between those two things.
Yeah. Okay. So that's something I think to play with. And
Yeah.
so one of the things we talk about in the book is this idea of, we talked about this identity piece, but there also what you can do is you can just start to program yourself of I am a fiction writer. I am a writer of Hasidic tales.
Yeah, and actually one of the things that I noticed in my own answer is, I may be asking the wrong question. You asked me, do I think I could be a fiction writer? And my answer to you was, I don't know that I'll ever be a great fiction writer. And those are two different, that's a disconnected
Very
answer to
different
that
things.
question.
Right.
Like, you're not asking me, do I think I can be a great fiction writer? You're just
Mhm.
saying, do I think I can be a fiction writer? And
Mhm.
so I think it's interesting where my head goes, which is, if I'm not a great fiction writer, then I'm not really a fiction writer.
Right.
And from a coaching perspective, you know, I might say to myself, like, all right, you know, maybe that's the wrong bar. The question
Uh-huh.
she asked you was, you know, do you believe you can be a fiction writer? And my answer to that question is yeah.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question to ask yourself as well, because when you first started writing, when you wrote your very first nonfiction book, did you even think of yourself as a writer, or were you writing a book because you had something you wanted to say? It was a calling card for your business. And so that's another question to ask yourself.
Right, right. I mean, you know, the answer is actually, I wrote, you know, as a kid, I used to write fiction stories all the time. It's just when I grew up that I stopped. Um, but I remember I was actually in with a very, very good friend of mine in a hot tub. We were skiing somewhere in
Mhm.
Utah, I think. And we met some people, and they said, and I'd just begun to write, and they said, "What do you do?" And I said, you know, I'm a writer. And I'd maybe written an article or two. And later my friend was like, "You're not a writer." I'm like, "Well, I'm trying it on. Like, I've written some stuff, and I'm trying to, like, I'm playing with this identity. Like, what does it
Mhm.
sound like when I tell someone I don't know I'm a writer? Like,
Mhm.
do I believe it? Do I not believe it?" So
Mhm.
that kind of, you know, relates
Yeah.
to that question.
So I'd say on the explorer phase is it sounds like you've actually made the decision that you want to be on this S curve, but there's some identity pieces that you want to be playing with and just asking yourself, do you actually believe that you can attain? And what is it that you're trying to attain? Like what you just said. And then another question you want to ask is, is it easy to test? So what could you write that would allow you to test if this makes sense for you? So instead of trying to write a great novel, is there some very short story that you could write, put it out to a few people and start getting information and feedback on that so that you can.
Yeah. I mean, I would say even I would lower the bar to that, which is like my equivalent of your 5-minute run,
Yeah.
which is don't even write a short story, write a scene, write a conversation, look at a picture and write about what's happening in that picture in kind of a fun way. And I don't necessarily need to show it to other people because I do get pleasure out of my own writing. So like, I
Yeah.
don't need other people to say it's good or not yet, because I think one of the things that I have to shortcut in myself is that writing, for me to write fiction, requires someone else to say it's good. So I think that might shut me down. It might be a better thing to say, write for 5 minutes of something.
I love it. I
And
love it. Yeah.
yeah.
So what I would, a couple additional thoughts. So one thing is that another question is, does this fit my identity? And the fact is it does, because you've been writing fiction since you were a child.
Right.
Hasidic tales are also consistent with your
Style
heritage, right? Your
my
style of
heritage.
writing and your heritage, right?
Right.
So they're both consistent.
Right.
So then what I would say to you is, then let's look at the collector stage, and you're basically now collecting data of, does this make sense for me to stay on this curve? And to your point, maybe the goal is 5 minutes a day of writing fiction,
Right.
no matter what,
Right.
for 30 days.
Right.
And see what happens. And you
Right.
just ask yourself, did I enjoy this? And if the answer is, yeah, I enjoyed it. Okay, let's go another 30 days of 5 minutes a day. You start to build momentum. And once you build those neural pathways, you're able to start to gain momentum and accelerate into the sweet spot. So that would be those are my suggestions to you.
Those are great suggestions. And I'm going to commit to 5 minutes today of writing. So that's really, really fantastic. We have been speaking with Whitney Johnson. She is awesome. She has written most recently the book Smart Growth: How to Grow Your People to Grow Your Company. There's great wisdom in our conversation, Whitney. And what I really love where we ended is, where do you start, right? Which is, like the most important part of the S curve is, the first 5 minutes, right? In a sense, because that's what launches you onto the rest of the S curve. Buy the book. It's a great book. It's a guide to, moving forward in the things that you're going to find are really important to you, and it's motivation to keep going. Whitney, thank you so much for being on the Bregman Leadership Podcast.
Peter, thank you for having me. That was a lot of fun.